The day before Thanksgiving in 1971, a man identifying himself as Dan Cooper bought a plane ticket from Portland to Seattle. He hijacked the plane, claiming he had a bomb in his briefcase and demanded $200,000 and 4 parachutes. He jumped out of the plane with the money and the bomb somewhere over the Pacific Northwest, never to be seen again. The FBI claims to have investigated over 1,000 people, including dozens of deathbed confessions. In 2016, 45 years after the hijacking, the FBI suspended its investigation of the case. While the FBI is no longer looking for DB Cooper, there is a community of people who are trying to solve the case on their own. Welcome to the Cooper Vortex. In this episode, we're lucky to be joined by the creator and host of Black Box Online Radio, where he recently started releasing a DB Cooper video every Friday. If that's not enough for you, he also releases a Zodiac video every Monday and a Jack the Ripper episode every Wednesday. He's a busy guy. Enjoy this episode with my good friend, Ned DeHan. Ned, when was the first time you heard about DB Cooper?
I first heard about DB Cooper probably in my young adulthood because DB Cooper is a name that it might come up in a song from Chris Rock that we used to listen to on the radio, but because I didn't know who DB Cooper was, it never really registered. I used to follow a lot of true crime channels on YouTube that would do countdowns like top 10 unsolved mysteries, and that's really when I learned about DB Cooper, and they would just go through some very basic pieces of information. He was a skyjacker. He boarded a plane with a bomb and a briefcase, or allegedly boarded a plane with a bomb and a briefcase, what appeared to have been a bomb, and that DB Cooper disappeared and he was never found or seen again.
What really got you sucked into the vortex?
Strangely, it was my audience. My name is Ned DeHan, and I'm the host of Black Box Online Radio, and I do a regular segment about the Zodiac killer every Monday, Zodiac Monday, and I noticed that my audience was a very, very well, they were very involved with the DB Cooper case as well. And some people were even stating that they follow the Zodiac mystery and they follow the DB Cooper mystery. And those were really the only true crime stories that they followed. Sometimes it's done for time because, people have to respond to things offline. And even when I work a full-time job, it's quite difficult to follow multiple unsolved mysteries. And then I just would respond to people in the comment section, and some people would even make requests. Hey, did you hear this new thing about this DB Cooper suspect? Well, did you hear this new thing about so-and-so? And in 2020, I had the opportunity to interview Drew Beeson. He is the author of Sighting In on the Zodiac Killer, but he is also the author of Paratrooper of Fortune, a book about the DB Cooper case. And
Great
he has
guy.
a DB Cooper suspect out there named Ted B. Braden. And, it's just a lot of the people who follow some of the other true crime stories that I talk about are close followers of DB Cooper. And, they pulled me in. One thing led to another, and I was just looking at DB Cooper a lot more.
This isn't usually where I start, but I think it'll work. There's a lot of people that make a connection between DB Cooper and the Zodiac killer. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, certainly there are people who have made that connection, most notably in David Gold's book, My Dance with the Zodiac Killer, when that more or less is his claim that the Zodiac Killer and DB Cooper are the same person, and he has a suspect named Frank Lee Morris. I think it's a pretty far out claim, and there definitely doesn't appear to be a lot of physical evidence to support that. I should point out that David...
I had Dr. Gold on the show.
Oh, yes. I mean, he is somebody who's actually taken the effort, and he's actually done the work to write a book and put his name on it and just say, this is, my story of the Zodiac Killer and DB Cooper. And even if you look at the title of his book, he has the Zodiac, DB Cooper, and the Phantom Killer on there, My Dance with the Zodiac Killer. But he's not the only one who supports the Zodiac DB Cooper connection. There's also someone online named Ray Penrod who writes about it very frequently. His Zodiac DB Cooper suspect is named Richard Ralph Mangan. And the idea that Jack Torrance was the Zodiac and DB Cooper has been entertained by a YouTube show that follows Jack Torrance's criminal involvements, allegedly. And I just think that they are very different types of stories, and also very, very different physical descriptions. Because the more I get into the DB Cooper case, I find that I see these things about how He is somebody who was olive skinned, maybe even like appearing Hispanic at first glance to some people. And I'm not saying I agree with all that stuff, but the Zodiac killer was not reported to have had any of those particular descriptions. And it also appears that the Zodiac killer was a lot heavier than DB Cooper. DB Cooper was some guy who was, sometimes you read the stuff about how maybe 6 feet tall, 170, 180, 190 pounds, and the Zodiac was referred to as 200, 220, and maybe even 225 pounds. So the Zodiac was maybe a little bit shorter and a little bit heavier. And overall, though, I think the Zodiac DB Cooper connection is something that a lot of people want to respond to. I want to respond to it. When somebody has written a book like Dr. David Gold about the Zodiac and DB Cooper are the same person, I get curious. I want to know what the claim is. I want to know what the story is. But at the end of the day, I believe they were different people.
It's wildly different crimes. I mean, the Zodiac hurt people and did not take anything. Cooper did not hurt anyone and took stuff.
Oh yeah, so I mean, DB Cooper definitely took the money, but the Zodiac became somewhat of a trophy killer at the end with his final crime, the murder of Paul Stein on October 11th of 1969. And this is something where he deviated from his normal behaviors. He stole Paul Stein's wallet, he stole the keys, and the driver's license of Paul Stein, and the piece of Paul Stein's bloody shirt that was used to mail that was mailed in with multiple Zodiac correspondences. The Zodiac's a very inconsistent serial killer, but DB Cooper was not a serial killer. I mean, DB Cooper was somebody who, as you said, he took stuff, but I think there has been a very big change for me as somebody who does a regular segment about the Zodiac killer to doing DB Cooper, because DB Cooper wasn't a murderer. And I see these people having a little bit of fun with the DB Cooper story. And I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing, like Cooper Con and celebrating DB Cooper Day. Again, I don't think that's a bad thing because DB Cooper didn't kill anyone. He had a bomb, but he didn't detonate it to the best of our knowledge. So if people are following the story and they are just, showing a little bit of admiration for DB Cooper, it's not the most evil thing in the world. He was a criminal, but he wasn't a vicious criminal like a serial killer.
Did you read Dr. David Gold's book?
No, but I plan to because I do the segment about the Zodiac Killer every Monday. And David Gold also has a YouTube channel, and he released
Oh yeah.
I don't know how many hundreds of videos. And back in 2020, I watched almost all of them that were relevant to the true crime stuff. Like it's a YouTube channel where he has a blend of his own personal vlog where he's talking about daily life, and then other things talk about the true crime cases. One of his most famous videos actually is one that I did watch where he just talks about unlocking lost memories, how to remember something you've forgotten. And if anything, that was an interesting video. But I watched about 100 of his videos when I did my first episode on him back in 2020. But I would like to go through his book at some point because the Zodiac DB Cooper connection is becoming more and more widely discussed. And overall, I think that if it's going to be widely discussed, then I should respond to it on Black Box Online Radio.
Dr. David Gold's a wild boy. I had him on my show and he told me that Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers killed 20,000 people.
Oh, yes, because some of his claims are that, like, I'm from West Virginia, and one claim is that they caused a bridge collapse in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, that would have killed numerous people, and they were responsible for crimes, again, that aren't exactly what we would think of when it comes to typical serial killer behaviors, like causing a bridge collapse, traffic accidents. But yes, he has three suspects: John Anglin, Clarence Anglin, and Frank Lee Morris. And Frank Lee Morris, if I recall, is the one whom he says was DB Cooper. But in terms of just knowing these people personally, the reason why I'm not using the word theories is when I did my first episode on Dr. David Gold's book, I was saying that this is his theory about the Zodiac killer. And he actually responded to me in the comments section on YouTube saying, they're not theories. These are things that he remembers from the past. Again, using that set of memory techniques that he talked about on his channel, which, going off of memory, what a wonderful word, is that if you forget something, what you can do is you first remember the closest event that you can to that event, and then you slowly remember things in sequence. And it can be done in somewhat of a meditative way, and it can also be done in just a way of like placing certain segments together in your own mind. Now, are these always going to be accurate? I don't believe so. I think that human beings can get things wrong all the time. And you follow a channel that deals with a true crime story. Eyewitnesses are horribly unreliable because the way that the human memory functions is it can conflate things, it can confuse things. People can remember things incorrectly, especially when it comes to what people were wearing, what kind of colors were in a room, because you're not trying to retain all of that. So instead, you start thinking about what it should look like. You start remembering what makes sense to you. But, in the true crime world, it's not just about what makes sense. It's not just about something that lines up in your own logical sequence. It's about what actually happened. And sometimes you're dealing with people who have very deranged forms of thinking.
Do you think that there is anything, speaking to eyewitness testimony, do you think there is anything to be had from the people that were on the plane at this point in time, 51 years later?
When you say the people on the plane, are you referring to the staff or the other passengers?
Let's go both.
Well, the staff interacted with DB Cooper for an extended period of time, particularly Tina Mucklow and Florence Schaffner. And when I looked at the Zodiac killer mystery, the eyewitness descriptions are based on milliseconds. Okay, a little bit more than that, but you have some people that saw the Zodiac out of a window in their house, wiping down a taxi cab, and he walked away. You have the Zodiac walking past two police officers, and like, how long does that take? With DB Cooper, the people who were on the plane spent an extended amount of time with DB Cooper. But Darren, look, the witness descriptions are all different. The composite sketches are different. And I'm a newcomer to the DB Cooper case. I've just launched my segment, Cooper Friday, on Black Box Online Radio. And one thing that surprised me so much was looking at the different composite sketches and noticing that not only are they different, they are majorly different, especially when you have, the Bing sketch, Composite A, then you have maybe the one that's, fairly widely distributed, Composite B. Then when I saw Florence Schaffner's sketch, Composite C, the one that was made in the 1980s, there is no way that I would think that all of these sketches are of the same person. The Florence Schaffner sketch has a hairline that comes inward, almost like a widow's peak. It has a much larger nose, and then
He's very angry.
it's like this, like almost rough-faced man. Whereas the Composite A, like the Bing sketch, is very smooth. He looks like Bing Crosby, and then you have the Composite B is not exactly somewhere in the middle. It's just different facial features, a much wider nose, and also almost even like more bright-eyed, more wide-eyed. Looks just like William J. Smith, in my opinion, although he might not be the most reliable DB Cooper suspect. Not that William J. Smith asked for any of this. It's just there's a strong resemblance. So I'm just noticing all of these things that are coming from witnesses, and they're all different. The way that people remember this guy looking, they spent a lot of time with him. So I would hope that at least one of those composite sketches is spot on. I would hope. However, I mean, how do we truly trust anyone if they're all different?
Yeah, it's just I hear people say sometimes, like, if only I could show the picture of my suspect to the stewardess. And it's just like so much time has gone by that I'm not confident at all if she looked at a picture of who Cooper was at this point that she could say, oh, yeah, that was him.
Oh, certainly. And some people, as I understand, have brought their suspects to Tina Mucklow and Florence Schaffner.
Oh,
And
many
that was one of
times.
the things that I remember, though, from my first interview with Drew Beeson. He said that and it's been a couple years since we did that interview, but he brought it to Tina Mucklow, his photos of Ted B. Braden, his DB Cooper suspect, and she actually thought there was a very high chance that or she thought that it resembled him. And Ted Braden does resemble the Florence Schaffner sketch that was made in the 1980s. But what people always point out about Ted B. Braden is he has a very different nose shape than the other two DB Cooper sketches. Composite A, the Bing sketch, is one that really surprised me when I first saw it. Like I said, in my early adulthood, when I was really exposed to DB Cooper, that was the first one that I saw. And I talk about this a lot on Black Box Online Radio, that that composite sketch has an abnormally narrow nose, in my opinion. Like the bridge of the nose, just the entire length of it, it just looks almost inhumanly narrow.
It
And I
looks
was like,
like the nose that Michael Jackson was trying to achieve.
something like that, right? But that's not natural, right? That
No.
is, and composites B and C, fair enough, fair enough. But yeah, as far as that goes, I had some doubts about the Bing sketch, but just somebody has a little bit of a wider nose. That's not really going to be shocking. I was just surprised that that's the way that the composite came out.
Composite A, the Bing sketch, there is something almost not human about it. Like that uncanny valley with an AI picture where it's like, that's a picture of a guy, but it doesn't look like one.
I mean, like it's a very pristine sketch, and it doesn't really have a lot of like strong distinguishing details. Like the facial features look very plain. That's why I said in composite B, the eyes appear wider, they appear more lifelike, and I think I've already stated in this episode that I think that William J. Smith is the closest match to Composite B. I was actually contacted by his daughter after I did an episode about him on Black Box Online Radio, and she just flat out said the family denies it. Her father, William J. Smith, was not DB Cooper, and they just think that it's just misinformation that's going around about the internet. And ultimately, as a DB Cooper suspect, I'm mostly seeing that his similarities to the descriptions are the biggest piece of evidence. The second one is that he worked for the railroad, and DB Cooper had left behind a tie on the plane, allegedly, and that there were metallic particles that were on this tie. And somebody who worked in the railroad could be exposed to all types of different metallic elements, working in facilities that would have different types of metals and so on. Yeah, you find explanations like that, but I mean, I think you and I both know that's insufficient evidence.
Oh yeah. So, what are your thoughts about publicly accusing someone as a suspect in a crime? Let's say you and we come up with a suspect and we're going to come forward. Hey, it turns out it was Paul Jones who did this, but Paul Jones passed away in, 2011. What are your thoughts on that, on publicly accusing someone of something?
Well, in the United States of America, legally, you can accuse somebody without facing libel and slander laws. You can't libel a dead man. But I'm surprised that a lot of the family members are so appalled about hearing that their family member was a DB Cooper suspect. Because as I said, DB Cooper didn't kill anyone. He may have threatened people. He may have done something illegal. But that is definitely something that it's almost like a ruse that was put on. And, something that was done in a very daring way. But I don't really... I mean, what I can do is try and put myself into their shoes, use some cognitive empathy and so on, and just think that I wouldn't be extremely offended if someone accused one of my family members of being DB Cooper. Now, accusing them of being a serial killer, that is a whole different level of intensity. Saying that, yeah, we think your family member killed a bunch of people and just lied about it. And that is one thing that's just also that I've experienced in my journeys in the true crime world. On Black Box Online Radio, I talk about the Zodiac Killer, and I also talk about Jack the Ripper every Wednesday. The Zodiac, Jack the Ripper, and DB Cooper are the cases that I follow. And it was so different once I began starting to follow DB Cooper because, again, you're going from these vicious serial killer stories. Jack the Ripper not only murdered women, but he mutilated and disemboweled them. And then to DB Cooper, he really just set something up. And we aren't completely sure why DB Cooper even put on this skyjacking, why he did all of this. And the more that I look into the DB Cooper case, the less I think it was done for money, the less I think it was financial, because the serial numbers from DB Cooper's money, if we're going to call it his money, have all been logged and reported, and the money has never appeared in circulation to the best of my knowledge. And they did find $5,800 at Tina Bar in 1980, right? And that is the amount of money that was trying to be spent at a store or found in circulation that was buried in the sand. So I just really began to think less and less that DB Cooper was actually doing this for profit. And I think that there could be an ulterior motive. But to answer your question, I don't necessarily think accusing somebody of DB Cooper is an evil thing to do, especially if you have evidence and facts to support it. And one thing that I have defended people in the past when they brought Zodiac killer suspects forward is, what if they're right? Yeah, I know it might, some people might not want to hear this about their family member, but what if they've actually found the person? What if they've actually solved the mystery? So I think that they have a right to come forward. And as I said, you can't libel a dead man.
What do you think of DB Cooper's flight path?
I feel a little bit conflicted because some people insist that everything is documented. They know exactly where DB Cooper was flying, and other people think that that is pure misinformation that was shared to the media. And these would be the people who might be pushing a suspect so on. And one of the first suspect profiles I did on Black Box Online Radio was of Walter Recca. And what I said on that episode was, I don't think I've ever gone into an unsolved mystery with this amount of enthusiasm just to be so disappointed by the end of it. Walter Recca was a DB Cooper suspect who not only confessed to being DB Cooper to somebody, but it was recorded and he was on tape talking about how he did the skyjacking, what he was thinking when he did the skyjacking, and he goes on to be the subject of 2 different DB Cooper books, and one's DB Cooper and Me, and the other one is by Joe Koenig, and
Getting the Truth.
Yes. And then he's providing all these explanations, but the Walter Recca can be placed about 100 miles east of the expected flight path of DB Cooper's plane in Cle Elum, Washington on the night of the skyjacking. And, there's a witness that saw him and everything, took him to a restaurant and had coffee with him. And then that entire theory is almost contingent, not 100%, but almost contingent on the fact that there was misinformation put out about DB Cooper's flight path. That's the authorities trying to spread misinformation to put DB Cooper into a false sense of security. Now, that's one thing. And I said I'm conflicted about that because those guys could be completely right that the flight path was documented, but what was revealed to the public was not true. All right, I mean, those types of things happen all the time. And I was just watching a documentary that was like a user-generated one on YouTube, and they were talking about how they believed that DB Cooper was actually jumping out of the plane about 20 miles east of the expected flight path, not 100, not 100. 100's an enormous thing in this Walter Recca theory. They think it was actually about 20 miles east. And I've also done an interview with Jeremy Berthium on my channel. His DB Cooper suspect is Kenny Christensen, him among others. And he actually expected that DB Cooper jumped out of the plane close to Tina Bar, and he landed at Tina Bar. And that was like, it wasn't an accident that the money was there. And overall, though, I think, though, that the most convincing explanation that I heard about DB Cooper's jump is that it is rather similar to the documented flight path, and that he jumped. This is all from Bill Rollins, actually. I thought his analysis was very interesting. DB Cooper jumps out of the plane close to the expected flight path, and that he actually landed in the Lewis River, in or around the Lewis River, and he had a boat that was stationed there, positioned there. He got on the boat in the Lewis River, and then he took the boat to the Columbia River, and through his movements, that's when the 3 bundles of $20 bills were dropped at Tina Bar. Now, one of the reasons why Bill Rollins says this is that there was a hydroelectric dam in the area, and DB Cooper could have used that as a marking point. People are like, how could this guy jump out of a plane at night wearing a suit with no tie even, no helmet, no boots, and he's jumping at night into cloud cover, into the rain, and how on earth would he have been able to know where he was going? what Bill Rollins proposed is that he was using the hydroelectric dam in the area as a marker. It would have stood out like a Christmas light on a tree. Yeah, I think that's the exact quotation. It would have stood out like a Christmas light, so he could have known where he was, guides himself in or around the Lewis River, and then he got into a boat and went to the Columbia River, and that's where the money was dropped. So that means that the conventional flight path might not be completely wrong, but I don't trust the authorities. Let's just say that.
What do you think of Bill Rollins' suspect, Joe Lakic?
I think that he has a lot of strong points. When I did my episode on Joe Lakic, I was conflicted. Not like the Walter Recca thing, where I went into it like, oh my goodness, there could be something here, and then just feeling absolutely disappointed and there's nothing. I think that Bill Rollins has decided that his suspect is DB Cooper, and he is not really going to consider other pieces of evidence, and that's not good. Because it's not just a belief system. It's not just, okay, I know the truth and I have to stand by this statement no matter what. But there are some strong reasons why Joe Lakic could be DB Cooper. Number one, similarities to at least one of the Composite sketches. Number two, the very clear motive. And Joe Lakic had a daughter named Susan who was killed in a skyjacking. What was it, 52 days before DB Cooper's jump? This was called November 58 or 58 November. And she was actually murdered by her significant other. He was the one who did the skyjacking. So when DB Cooper's on the plane, he said that he didn't have a grudge against the airline. He just had a grudge. That could have been what he was referring to. And also because he had just lost his daughter, someone who would have been reckless, someone who would have wanted to make a mockery of the authorities, someone who would have done this for the thrill of it, or not exactly the thrill, mostly just revenge and not caring about society, lots of apathy, as opposed to someone who is doing this for profit. So that would also explain why the money wasn't spent. And I think if you even get on the DB Cooper suspect WordPress, it'll just say that Joe Lakic had a clear motive, a crystal clear motive for committing this crime. Joe Lakic was also an electrical engineer, so it wouldn't be a shocker if he was familiar with the hydroelectric dam in the area. And again, all of this material comes to us from Bill Rollins and just citing the source. So there are some strong points, but it's still a mystery, right?
It is still a mystery. Does Cooper survive his jump?
For the longest time, I thought yes. And I'm going to be talking about this on some of the new episodes of Black Box Online Radio, Cooper Friday, coming out. At first, I was like, yes, the main suspect that I've looked at have survived the jump. And one thing that is shared in documentaries like The Skyjacker That Got Away and other ones that you can find on YouTube is that there weren't any missing persons reports of somebody in the area that matched the description. It's hard to say that there weren't any. I mean, turns out you might find something if you look at a true crime case long enough. But the suspects that I talk about survived the jump. Now, when you read things that are done from more conventional mainstream sources, even the FBI is talking about DB Cooper not surviving the jump, meaning that he wouldn't even been able to get his parachute open. If he's jumping, just wearing a pair of loafers, not even with boots, not with a helmet, he might not have even been able to open the chute, and that he could have crash landed at some remote place in the Pacific Northwest, and just people weren't able to find the body. We're talking about a very specific part of the forest, a very specific part of the river. And one theory that was discussed, was it in The Skyjacker That Got Away, perhaps, was that he landed in the Lewis River and he got tangled up in the propeller of a boat, and that dragged him to the Columbia River, and that ultimately DB Cooper either died on impact or drowned in the water. And then that's the reason why the money was found at Tina Bar, because the propeller of a boat pulled him for that amount of miles. So I think that, though, the more I look at this, I comprehend the narrative on how DB Cooper didn't survive the jump. And I'm probably going to lean toward that way in the future. But as of now, I think that DB Cooper survived. And maybe I don't have the best reasons for that, but that's what I would go with.
Was his bomb real, Ned?
I don't think there was any reason for DB Cooper to have a real bomb. And other people think like this. I think like this. A dud would have accomplished the job.
Mm-hmm.
Making something out of road flares, making something out of just fake dynamite. And one thing that I was seeing that people were talking about is, well, DB Cooper might not have been an expert on making bomb decoys. He would have had to have known somebody that could have made a convincing decoy. No, not really. I mean, you could do this. I could do this. You could get red tubes and an alarm clock or something like that, and you could make your own dud. It's a dud. It's not real. Some people would be better than others, but you could make this. And what some people point out is the reason why they think that the bomb was a dud was that DB Cooper perhaps was familiar with the aviation protocols. He was familiar that if he told this to the flight attendants, that they would have to comply with his request, that this is the chain of events and the chain of command, and that this is how things would have gone down. But that's the long story short.
Yeah, and if you're on a plane with someone and they're like, yo, I got a bomb, you can't ask them to prove it. I don't believe you. Go ahead, detonate it. You have to take their word for it.
Yes, I agree completely, because this is just something that they wouldn't have risked. And what was it? What was it like? I was just watching one thing, and they said that, he's lucky that he didn't get overpowered by the staff or something like that, or that it's Tina Mucklow, right, who comes down to get the money to bring it back on the plane to give to DB Cooper, right? Yep. And they're like, they could have given her a firearm and just said, end his life. And I was like, really? That's what you think would happen? That the authorities are going to give Tina Mucklow a handgun? It's like, yeah, hide this somewhere that he can't see it, and when you get a chance, shoot him in the head. And I know that they're being like a little bit facetious and they're just providing some far out example. But the reason why they wouldn't do that is, what if some way, somehow, he was able to detonate the bomb even in his last moments, and they're just not going to take that risk? So he knew that he could follow those steps and that he would be able to pull this thing off. There's no reason to have a real bomb. Now, some people think that DB Cooper was doing this for the thrill of it, and that he didn't care if he lived or died. Think about everything I've said about Joe Lakic and other people who might have had a grudge for some reason, and he could have brought a real bomb because he would have detonated it. Even if he didn't want to kill people on the plane, he would have jumped out the back and he would have detonated it in the sky. But as of now, I think the bomb was a dud.
What do you think of the name he gave, Dan Cooper? Do you think there is any potential connection to a Belgian comic book?
I think people love to zone in on that. I think people might be reading too much into that. Is there a potential connection? Absolutely. Is it certifiable? No. It's an ordinary name from the English language, Dan Cooper. And to say that it came from the Belgian comic book 100%, I think is just, it's possible. And you can think about that. Dan Cooper is somebody from the Belgian comics who would jump out of, he was a skydiver, paratrooper of sorts. And I think that it's possible, but to say with certainty that that's why he chose that name, I don't think there's any other evidence that was left behind that would indicate with 100% certainty that that's why that name was chosen. Because, for example, with the theory involving Milton Voordal as DB Cooper, one thing is that he had a grudge against somebody named Don Cooper. Don Cooper, Dan Cooper. Okay, just make a mockery of somebody that was in his personal life. There could be other reasons why that name was chosen, Dan Cooper. And I completely confess, I agree with the media, though, DB Cooper has a better ring to it.
Oh, it definitely does. We even inside the community, everyone calls him DB Cooper, even though we know he never gave that name.
I think it's just a little bit unique and it stands out. And firstly, Dan Cooper was already taken by the comics, even if it was completely unrelated. Because here's an issue about this, and I'm going to talk about this on the next episode on Friday, Cooper Friday on Black Box Online Radio. This is going to be a big component of that episode, and that is that the Dan Cooper comic was primarily available in the French language in 1971. It's been translated now into multiple languages, not only English, but also German, throughout Europe. But it was a French language comic. And, just is a kind of an obscure thing for somebody to use an alias for, or like to take the name of a French language comic. And some people think that their suspect was stationed in Europe, and then this is how they, and it's stationed in Europe with the military. And then other people think that DB Cooper was Canadian, and that he was, like bilingual, and that's how he learned the name, and he didn't think English speakers would recognize it. But that's just something I think is a little bit less likely that it actually came from the comic. And as you see, I'm very 50-50 on it because it's entirely possible. It's just we don't know 100% that that's why he chose the name. So I'm 50-50.
I'm probably 50-50, but I want it to be true.
It would
Because
make
it's
a lot of sense, that there's this paratrooping comic book figure and then somebody's using that name. It's almost just like somebody has like this type of mask costume and they say their name is Bruce Wayne or something like that. And well, there could be another reason for that, but Bruce Wayne could also be Batman. And
I'm with you 100% on that one. Do you think this was meticulously planned or he scribbled it down on a napkin the night before?
absolutely, I think this was meticulously planned. And I might not have had the strongest stances on some of these things. Like Getch just told you I was 50-50 about the Dan Cooper thing. I think this was meticulously planned. Was it perfectly planned? No, not perfectly. But I think that this was scoped out. What am I going to do? What am I going to say? Because DB Cooper seems to have a reasonable amount of knowledge with the airplanes and aviation. Not perfect, because when I was reading Ross Richardson's book, Still Missing, Rethinking the D.B. Cooper Case, it talks about how this is almost an exact quotation. D.B. Cooper would have had an intimate knowledge of aviation and airplanes. But at the same time, when D.B. Cooper has landed and they're waiting to get the money, when he's waiting for Tina Mucklow to come back with the money, it's that's when he orders the plane to go off with the aft staircase down or with the staircase lowered, and they're like not able to do that. Also, DB Cooper said he wanted to fly to Mexico City, and a plane that size didn't have the fuel to fly to Mexico City. That's why they decided that they would agree upon a stopover in Reno, Nevada. So those things indicate someone who doesn't know everything about airplanes, but I think he put an enormous amount of planning in this. And if he survived the jump, if he was able to survive, I think that he would have planned out his movements on the ground. And it's not something where it has to be he's documenting every footstep. It's not something where he is thinking, like, okay, I'm going to just do 197 different movements. It's going to be like what I said about Bill Rollins, that he had a boat station nearby. He was going to use this thing as a geographic marker. He was going to go from the Lewis River to the Columbia River to a getaway point. That type of stuff. That's what I think would have happened. So overall, I think it was meticulously planned.
What do you think all this says about who Cooper was? Because if I told you, hey, Ned, there was this crazy skyjacking and the guy jumped out of the plane, guess how old he was? You'd probably say, I don't know, 24, 25. But no, Cooper is 40 to 50 years old, and he has this ability to be in complete control of the situation while remaining calm, cool, and collected. What type of guy is that?
Now, I just want to point out that I am somebody who explores this material, and I'm going to share what I genuinely think now. But a year from now and 2 years from now, I might learn some new information that would change my position. And I've experienced that when I've been looking at the Zodiac killer case and the Jack the Ripper case. And I've noticed even patterns in my own thought processes. But with D.B. Cooper, I first went in to think that, yep, this is exactly what people are talking about. A guy who would have been 42, 43, 44 years of age, single perpetrator, just some lone thrill jumper. Then, once I got under the surface, or into the vortex, as you would say, I began to think that D.B. Cooper had some type of connection to the CIA, FBI, some intelligence agency, some high ranking issue in the military. And I was just so surprised that the physical evidence was not handled well. I was so surprised that he wasn't found. They found all this other physical evidence, like the plate from the plane and the money, and they didn't find all the money. They didn't find the parachute. They didn't find him. If he died during the jump, well, where's the body? They're looking for him with an SR-71 Blackbird, right? Where's the body? And was this some type of CIA cover-up, FBI cover-up? What type of person was DB Cooper? I lean toward that way now, that he was somebody with a high-ranking connection to the CIA, FBI, or a different type of intelligence agency. But the reason why some people have an issue with me is, as you can see, I'm not endorsing that theory 100%. It's something that I want to explore. It's something that I am very curious about. I have suspicions. There are reasons why I think that. But as I said with both the Zodiac Killer and Jack the Ripper, I've looked at similar theories. And then about a year or two after that, I just begin to retract the more conspiratorial claims. And I begin examining something that's more like a single perpetrator. Yeah, it's just a lone individual who's working on his own accord, his own volition. That's with the Zodiac and Jack the Ripper. But with DB Cooper, I am just so shocked when I hear all of these things. They didn't preserve the cigarette butts that DB Cooper was smoking on the plane. They didn't preserve the glass that DB Cooper was using to drink his bourbon and 7-Up with. And the DNA evidence on Cooper's tie could even be questionable.
It's very questionable.
Well, people didn't know about DNA in 1971. It wasn't a thing. And it was normal for members of law enforcement to handle things with bare hands. I have a photo of the Zodiac investigators handling the physical evidence, the rope that the Zodiac brought to his Lake Berryessa stabbing, with their bare hands. And that means that DNA evidence is not going to be available. Everything's been contaminated. And with Cooper's tie, it's going to be probably a similar situation. And, like with these older cases, DNA evidence becomes more and more questionable because people just didn't know they had to preserve things like that.
There's also a hair slide, a DB Cooper hair slide. And guess what? That's missing too.
That's why I was leaning toward this like being some type of CIA cover-up. And that doesn't mean the CIA planned it. Not like the PSYOP where they are trying to do this to institute more rules and regulations for airlines and the FAA, but something to the effect of this guy had connections to the CIA and they covered it up because they didn't want to deal with the media backlash. That would involve somebody such as Ted B. Braden, somebody such as E. Howard Hunt, and even Robert Rackstraw could be included in that, the last master outlaw. And I don't think that Robert Rackstraw was D.B. Cooper.
Or Lauren Skip Hall would be included in that as well.
Okay, yes. But with Robert Rackstraw, though, he has a couple problems with him as a D.B. Cooper suspect. He was only 28 years old at the time of the skyjacking. And we just said eyewitness testimony isn't super reliable, but when I look at those D.B. Cooper composite sketches, 28 years old, I'm just not seeing it. I'm seeing some guy who is 40s, maybe early 50s. I mean, they're just like intense aging lines on some of the composites. And I just think that he was older than 28. Rackstraw also never admitted it, even though he was, like in his later years on his deathbed and so on. And I just don't think Robert Rackstraw was D.B. Cooper. I just wanted to point out that he's somebody that gets roped in to those types of cover-up theories because of his whole image as the last master outlaw.
Why are there so many suspects in this case, Ned?
Oh, absolutely. It's unconfirmed, and somebody thinks they can connect the dots. Same with the Zodiac and Jack the Ripper. Somebody is looking at this in a different way. And they find a suspect, and they find someone who can't be eliminated. They try to poke holes in the theory a little bit. Well, could this guy actually be D.B. Cooper? And then he can't be eliminated. Even somebody such as John Emil List, the family annihilator who was on the run at the time, he becomes a D.B. Cooper suspect. And, people are just having trouble eliminating him. They might not have the most physical evidence, but they just ruling somebody out. Where were they on this day in 1971? I mean, unless they have some type of documented, photographic, videographic evidence that they were somewhere else, it's still possible in the minds of many. So what people do is they begin to find somebody who resembles the physical description, and countless people do that. All you need is brown hair to be about 6 feet tall, maybe 5'10". Eye color means nothing. This is one thing that shocked me so much. Is just that they're DB Cooper suspect with all types of different eye colors, and brown and blue and green, and like even that is not really like a prerequisite. So people kind of look at these different possibilities, they choose a suspect, and then they make the evidence fit. Sometimes they have good ideas. I told you praiseworthy things about Bill Rollins. I think he has great observations about the D.B. Cooper case, but I also think he has latched onto a suspect, and that he is probably someone who wouldn't consider evidence to the contrary.
On that topic, let me ask you this, okay? I'm out there, Ned. I promoted my suspect, Paul Jones, as DB Cooper. I'm all over the place. It's Paul Jones, Paul Jones, Paul Jones. And then next year, I'm out and I'm like, you know what? I found a new suspect. It's Neil Thompson. It's Neil Thompson. It's Neil Thompson. Do you lose respect for me and me coming out with a second suspect, or do you respect the fact that I was like, okay, I was wrong about Paul Jones, but I got a new guy?
Absolutely, I respect the fact that you admit that you were wrong. Eric Eulis has done this very publicly, talking all about Sheridan Peterson, then talking about Vince Peterson. And I just think that you would be following the evidence as opposed to just latching on a suspect. Now, some people in the comment section on YouTube might be doing that for entertainment reasons. And at first, they're just looking at the suspect, not based on the evidence. It's just they want to hear more about person X, Mr. So and so, and then they want to hear about somebody different than that. Okay, they might latch on to the John Emile List theory. Then it'd be like they get bored with it, so they start looking at the E. Howard Hunt theory because CIA operative James Bond complex, that's more exciting. But if you're actually following the evidence, yeah, I would respect that a lot more than somebody who stood by their original claim in the face of contradictory evidence.
I agree with you on that because myself, when I came into DB Cooper, I read one book, and that actually I read two, but one sort of leads into the other, and I was like, okay, I've read two books about this, and obviously DB Cooper was Kenny Christensen. Case closed. I solved it. But then unfortunately I started doing some more research, and then I was like, oh my God, I don't think it's Kenny Christensen anymore. I've got to move on from that. And, unfortunately, I haven't been able to let it go at this point. But I want to ask you, you've brought up E. Howard Hunt a couple of times. What do you think of him as a suspect? I think he's really interesting.
At first, I thought he was the most ridiculous DB Cooper suspect in the world. I mean, I even did a short episode. It's like 1 minute long, a short YouTube reel, Facebook reel, Instagram reel about E. Howard Hunt as DB Cooper suspect, more or less just being like, what? Really? Like, because I've talked about E. Howard Hunt on Black Box Online Radio 4 because of his CIA connections. I did a discussion on the book Bond of Secrecy, which was written by his son, St. John Hunt. Now, as I said, I know how I think. And just because I am kind of pulled into one type of true crime theory now doesn't mean I will hold on to it 2 years from now. But this whole type of CIA cover-up angle makes sense to me right now, and I can comprehend that, about how there's just the evidence was handled so poorly that they didn't find Cooper when they should have. And somebody like E. Howard Hunt is somebody whom they would have covered for. Not to mention, E. Howard Hunt might be the closest match to the Bing sketch Composite A that we've talked about, the one that I was saying that had the extremely narrow nose. And when I was reading a portion of Nat LaFook's book, which he explores E. Howard Hunt as a D.B. Cooper suspect, he wants to point out something that he uses as a challenge to everybody, and that is that people have this belief that D.B. Cooper has to be just some type of angry, low-level guy who planned this because he was mad and he had a grudge against somebody. There's no way this could be connected to the CIA. There's no way that this could be connected to a larger entity. But it doesn't have to be that way. That is a prejudice that people would have about the case, that it has to be just some guy who was upset and he wanted money. I mean, it doesn't have to be that way. So I just, I'm all for that 100%. Challenge the existing belief system, because in the true crime world, it's not about belief, it's about obtaining facts and finding out what actually happened on that specific day. E. Howard Hunt also was trained with paratrooping, and he may have actually been trained to jump in a suit and tie, and he may have been somebody who would have had the type of personality to do this. He's the one that gets referred to as the guy with the James Bond complex. So there are pieces of evidence. It's not baseless. And, he is one of the more famous D.B. Cooper suspects. And I told you, I explored him in the past, completely unrelated reasons. But, there are pieces of evidence that do support that, and it's not a completely far out theory.
No, it's not. And when I have all these DB Cooper alerts set up, of course. And so when Nat LaFoque's book came out, I saw the Amazon page and read that thing, and I was like, oh my God, what the heck is this thing? And then I got the book, I read it, and I was honestly very impressed by it. And I would definitely recommend that to anyone listening to this show, whether or not you are ever going to believe that E. Howard Hunt was a legit suspect, because he does a really good job sort of asking you to be open-minded about things. And he's not saying this is the way it was, this is the way it was. He's saying, I don't know, but I think this is interesting and maybe you should look at it. Also, there's a really good section on there on the sketches that is just valuable information for anyone as a Cooper fan. All right, Ned. Did he have an accomplice?
Now, I was just reading the book Still Missing by Ross Richardson, Still Missing Rethinking the D.B. Cooper Case. And he talks about the accomplice thing in there. And to the credit of Ross Richardson, he's not arguing for this point. He is making this claim from other sources that people say that D.B. Cooper could not have possibly had an accomplice because there's no way that D.B. Cooper could have communicated with people from the plane. And he could, no matter how well he planned it, he couldn't have made communications to the ground from the airplane. And again, Ross Richardson isn't arguing that point. He's like, other people have said this, and he just has put it in his book because he's writing about D.B. Cooper. I disagree with that 100%, 110%. How on earth could you say that D.B. Cooper did not have an accomplice if we don't know who D.B. Cooper was? If we haven't actually solved the case, how can we say that an accomplice was impossible? And as I said, this doesn't require something like a cell phone or something like that, or like the people in some of the contemporary action movies communicating on satellite phones and such. No, think about just what I said about Bill Rollins and his theory. Oh, well, he would have jumped out of the plane, used the hydroelectric dam as a marker. The accomplice could have even stationed a boat or put a boat in a specific place, no matter whom D.B. Cooper was. Absolutely, it's possible that D.B. Cooper had an accomplice. Now, you could argue that there's insufficient evidence for that, and that might be jumping to conclusions. Fair enough, but to say that it's impossible? Not at all. It's possible. It's just depends on how likely you think it is.
Well, like most things in this case, we have equal evidence for an accomplice and for no accomplice because we have no evidence.
Mostly, and that is one of the real frustrating things about this case. And I would also add something. It's not only that we have no evidence, we should have evidence. There should be a mountain of evidence. I mean, there should be fingerprints, there should be DNA, there should be all types of things that could just kind of close the door on this. And if it wasn't any of the known suspects, and it was somebody who died during the jump, there should be a very clear missing persons report of somebody who matched that description, who went missing in November of 1971. And that person, someone from Seattle, somebody from Portland, somebody from Oregon or Washington State. And then it'd be like, oh, well, this all makes sense now. I just don't see any of that stuff.
You talked about the Zodiac and Jack the Ripper. One thing that's very different from this case compared to the other two is we have a series of confessions in the D.B. Cooper case. Depending on your source, I've heard up to 1,000 people have confessed to this crime. If you want to go higher than that, just go on Twitter and type I am D.B. Cooper, and you'll see 10,000 more people that have confessed to this. in a joking way, obviously. But why have so many people confessed to this crime?
I think that a lot of people would confess to this more than being the Zodiac killer because, again, D.B. Cooper was not a murderer. He was not a serial killer. And he committed a crime, but he didn't kill anyone. So there's less of a terrible reputation that would be associated with this. I mean, people have confessed to being the Zodiac killer as well, but a lot of those are alleged. With the DB Cooper things, everything is so clearly documented. You know, that, as I said, Walter Recca did this on tape, and you brought up about how people are confessing online and saying that they were DB Cooper. And you also hear other things about how people said that their family member confessed to them that they were DB Cooper, and even a little bit indirectly, like Wolfgang Gostet confessing that was to his sons in
To
an
his
indirect
sons
way. That
and two different lawyers. I also had Larry Carr on the show, and I asked him about this confession thing. And he worked on the case. He was an FBI agent on the case. And he said that during his tenure on the case, two different people went into FBI offices to confess to this crime. And he's sitting there right away, like, okay, this guy has nothing to do with it. But I can understand me and you are at the bar and I'm trying to be cool. And I'm like, hey, Ned, by the way, that DB Cooper thing, that was me. I pulled that off. I get that. But I don't get walking into an FBI office and sitting down at a table across from two agents while I tell them I committed a skyjacking.
well, when I was looking into Walter Recca as the DB Cooper suspect, the belief is that Walter Recca was absolutely not DB Cooper. The reason why he made a recorded confession was he was just acting out the fantasy of being a spy and being somebody who could have pulled it off, and acting out a fantasy. And there are a lot of people out there whom I think would do similar things. And with a different true crime story, The Phantom Killer from 1946, there was something that I encountered when they made a movie about it called The Town That Dreaded Sundown, which was released in the 1970s. And they have this guy who's confessing to being a serial killer. Yeah, he says he was the killer. He says he can show you where the gun is. He threw it into the river. He'll show you exactly where he threw it. And, you know, what they're alluding to is he's confessing, even though he didn't actually do it. It's just they wanted to point out that they get false confessions. And people do this with a lot of other things in the true crime world. They make fake letters. I mean, there could be fake DB Cooper letters out there, but also fake Zodiac letters, fake Jack the Ripper letters. At the time of Jack the Ripper, they received more than 1,000 letters that were investigated, and all but three of them are mostly dismissed as hoaxes, and perhaps even more. But people do confess to this. Now, to your point, fair enough. Okay, writing a fake letter saying I'm DB Cooper, I'm Jack the Ripper, I'm the Zodiac killer. That's not walking into a law enforcement or FBI office and saying, yeah, I did it and I'm confessing to it.
Yeah, that's a pretty wild thing to do.
Absolutely.
All right. Are you ready for the hardest question of them all, Ned?
Go for it.
How did the money get to Tina Barr?
I would have to go with that statement from Bill Rollins that DB Cooper lands and he survives the jump, and he dropped 3 bundles when he was taking a boat from the Lewis River to the Columbia River. Now, I was almost about to completely abandon that theory because of what was it called? History Unsolved was the name of the channel that did a video on DB Cooper, and they're putting forward a theory that the money was actually just in a different place, in a different river, and then it was moved to the Columbia River naturally, and they did a dredge of the Columbia River in 1974, and that pulled the money to Tina Barr, and it was sitting there for about 6 years, from 1974 to 1980. And then the problem with that is they even provided contradictory evidence in the documentary saying, all right, now this would make sense, except, that firstly, the reason why I keep going back to Bill Rollins is he was the one who just was the first to tell me that they examined the diatoms that were on the money. Diatomaceous evidence. I love that word, diatomaceous. The diatoms on the money, and they were from the Lewis River. So that would not really involve dredging the Columbia River because you would be dealing with some upstream currents. So that's just a little bit unlikely. But the only other theory that I thought that could be somewhat reasonably acceptable is DB Cooper survives the jump, and he came back years later. He buried the 3 bundles as some type of commemoration. And that is one that is so widely discussed when you just watch these 20-minute YouTube presentations or somebody spent 3 weeks reading about DB Cooper and they're going to abandon the subject tomorrow. That's the theory that they usually go with, that the money was intentionally planted there and it was done without the intention of coming back. If somebody's hiding like a stash of $5,800 for an emergency, it would have been preserved. And so those would be the two theories that I would go with. Number one, DB Cooper dropped 3 bundles when he was moving in a boat, crossing from one point to another. And if there's any other theory out there, then DB Cooper did it intentionally himself.
All right. I got a crazy question for you now. I know a handful of people that do a true crime podcast or a true crime show, and their audience is primarily female. I would say that DB Cooper is a true crime case. My audience is well over 90% male. And if you look at the DB Cooper community, it's well over 90% male. What is it about the DB Cooper case that seems to appeal exclusively to men?
I talk about the Zodiac killer, Jack the Ripper, and DB Cooper, and the majority of my audience is male as well. Although, I do have a large female following, comparatively speaking. With DB Cooper, yeah, mostly male as well. Then in the comment section, I'm seeing masculine names 90% of the time, maybe more. I think that men gravitate toward true crime cases where there is a persona that has been established in the media. And it's about trying to unmask this person who has a persona attributed to him. Because when I talk about other serial killer stories where there is not a name that has been given to the killer, or there isn't some type of puzzle that can be solved, like the Zodiac ciphers, the questions about, did DB Cooper have a real bomb? Did DB Cooper plan his skyjacking meticulously? When the puzzle, it doesn't have a puzzle that can be solved, men show a lot less interest in that. So number one, I think it's the problem-solving thing. Number two, I think the persona is part of a type of media packaging done unintentionally. It's not like somebody is just thinking, how can I make the DB Cooper case more appealing to a male audience? No. This is just an indirect consequence. So people become fascinated with this persona. Jack the Ripper, the Zodiac Killer, DB Cooper, and for a while there were other killers that had a persona out there that were part of the mysteries that people were very curious about. Michelle McNamara, author of All Be Gone in the Dark, openly stated that she gave the East Area Rapist the name the Golden State Killer. She coined the term Golden State Killer because calling him the East Area Rapist, he was referred to as Ear in the media, EAR, Ear, and they're like, what? And then he was also referred to as the original Night Stalker, so he was called Earons. And she's just like, people aren't going to listen to the story because they won't understand it. And she felt that there was a big true crime story there, so she coined the term Golden State Killer. And ultimately, the Golden State Killer was caught, and I believe to this day that the Golden State Killer story is more famous because of Michelle McNamara and the way she chose to present it to the audience. So I think people become very infatuated with the persona in good ways and in bad ways. And with DB Cooper, it's the same thing. And I think men would lean more toward that because of the problem-solving aspect, as opposed to some of the other stories. Like, I used to listen to the I Survive podcast all the time. That primarily has a female audience. The stories of people who survived an abusive relationship, that's a type of empathy that women tend to have in the true crime world, whereas men would gear more toward the problem-solving features of it.
Well said, Ned. I think that was a fantastic answer, especially on a subject matter that's kind of hard to explain like that.
Well, I've wrestled with it for a long time because when I started Black Box Online Radio, I was just thinking, I'm talking about all types of subjects, but the people want to hear mostly about the Zodiac Killer, and they're mostly men. And when I would look at other true crime channels that I would follow, I would look through the comments section, and I was so surprised that the audience was primarily female. And I was like, well, I mean, I'm a man and I watch this type of stuff, but I watch all types of true crime content, just to be fair. And I was just like, well, why is that? Why is that my audience wants to hear about the Zodiac and Jack the Ripper and now DB Cooper, and yet there are other true crime audiences that want to hear more about, as I said, stories of abuse and survival. And there was excuse me, there was a fascinating article that was done by the New York Times. It just talked about how a lot of women follow the true crime world because of empathy. One, they have empathy for the victims, and also it reinforces the principles of security in society, which is something that perhaps the female audience would lean more toward as well. They understand the risks and dangers of just being alive in America in the 21st century. And that's all from that article. That's what it was proposing. And with men, I think they would gear more toward trying to unravel the secrets of the mystery as opposed to those details.
I think that's a great answer, Ned. I appreciate that. All right, while you're out giving great answers, let's hear this one. What happened to the rest of Cooper's money? We know what happened to about $6,000. Where'd the rest go?
Well, the honest answer, Darren, is I don't know. And as I said, I'm highly suspicious of some type of involvement from a high ranking intelligence agency. They could have confiscated it and either confiscated it or maybe it was all planned from the beginning. The PSYOP thing, which isn't a ridiculous theory in the DB Cooper world, in my opinion. So the money could have just been confiscated. That would explain why it was never put into circulation. It could be that DB Cooper did this purely for the thrill and that he just moved it to some type of secure location, maybe even burned it. And did you ever watch the movie The Dark Knight with Heath Ledger?
Oh, yeah.
And there's a scene where Heath Ledger and his Joker cronies burn a bunch of money because it's not about the money. It's about the chaos and the destruction. And that movie came out years after DB Cooper, but same idea. Somebody who did this for the thrill of it. And also, this gets back to the CIA thing. Somebody might have had familiarity that the money would have been logged and he couldn't spend it. Now, I mean, that's just one reason why I'm so suspicious of some type of cover up from a high ranking intelligence agency, because you would think that if this were some lone wolf, Joe Schmo who's just mad about Problem X, he would have tried to spend the money. Even if he knew the serial numbers were logged, all right, well, then he's going to trade some money to somebody, gamble it away in Las Vegas, on one night or something like that. And that's why I am so suspicious of somebody covering this up.
Will this case ever be solved?
I hope so. I hope so. With the amount of physical evidence, I'm doubtful. The things that would solve this would be finding physical remains of DB Cooper in the forest, finding things like the parachute and the money, and the briefcase, and I think that would provide some more clues. But it's been over 50 years. People are scouring the area, and they are still not finding physical remains. Like, this is one thing that bothers me so much. The idea is that, number one, DB Cooper died in the trees. Number two, DB Cooper died in a body of water. 50 years and nothing has turned up. Not only, okay, you'd be like, oh, well, he drowned in some obscure part of the Columbia River. Well, if the river is dredged in 1974, still not finding physical evidence. I mean, that's just, I'm even more doubtful of that he died during the jump, because you would have to just I'll believe it when I see it. I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah, plus, I grew up in that area. In the year after the hijacking, okay, I was not alive in 1971, but in the year after, from November of 71 to November of 72, how many people do you think walked around the woods looking for him independently? Independently of a actual search?
Mega amounts of people.
Oh, yeah.
Enormous, scouring the area. That's what I would do.
Yeah, if there's a chance there's a dude with $200,000 strapped to him in the trees somewhere, yeah, me and my buddies are gonna go for a hike in the woods and see if we could find Cooper's money. And like you said, 1 million people did that.
And the fact that just none of that was found, the money didn't enter into circulation at all, other than the $5,800 that was found. That just to me suggests that there's some type of cover up going on. It's what I like to call the Master Yoda logic. When Yoda asks some kids once, well, why are there no records in the archives? Because somebody erased them. Why is there no money in the forest? Because somebody removed it. And that's my ultimate thing. And that's why I would lean toward DB Cooper, either surviving the jump or there's some type of extreme cover up going on.
All right, Ned, is there anything I didn't ask you that you wanted to talk about?
I would just like to say some things about some of the favorable DB Cooper suspects out there. And also, I want to point out that I'm a newcomer to the DB Cooper case. I've just launched Cooper Friday on Black Box Online Radio, where I talk about not only DB Cooper suspects, but also theories. And I've been talking about the Zodiac killer on Black Box Online Radio for 7 years. And after 7 years, I have to say I don't like any of the Zodiac killer suspects. The more I learn about that case, the less I know. I'm sure the DB Cooper case will be very similar. But I have thought favorably of the DB Cooper suspect Ted B. Braden in the past. And I think that there's some reasonable evidence that would point to that. He's the subject of the book Paratrooper of Fortune by Drew Beeson. And also on Black Box Online Radio, I do a segment every Monday about the Zodiac Killer and a segment every Wednesday about Jack the Ripper. Now, Jack the Ripper almost certainly will not be solved in my lifetime unless there's some type of scientific breakthrough. The Zodiac Killer maybe. DB Cooper should be a solvable case. But I'm not holding my breath exactly because a lot of the physical evidence no longer exists. Also on Black Box Online Radio, I release shorts and reels Monday through Friday, and the shorts come out on YouTube, 1-minute episodes. You can also get them as reels on Facebook and Instagram. My Facebook name is Ned DeHan, and my Instagram is BlackBoxNed88, and I am the author of the White Horse Killer Saga. It is a set of fiction that's available on YouTube exclusively in audiobook format, and it's based on the Zodiac Manson connection, the idea of the Zodiac Killer and Charles Manson working together, all fictional names, and it's set in the state of Maryland, not California. It's a novel, but I'm going to be starting the 4th story in the White Horse Killer Saga very soon, and that will be about it for me. And I would just like to say, Darren, thank you so much for inviting me on.
Ned, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it, and you're awesome. So everyone's going to check out your stuff, and we'll be seeing you around, Ned.
Hey, see you around too.
Thank you.
Go follow Ned on YouTube at Black Box Online Radio. Find him on Facebook and BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram. We've got links for it all in the show notes. If you have questions, comments, theories, or you know who DB Cooper was, hit us up. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, or email us dbcooperpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you to Ned DeHan for coming to us from 14 hours in the future. Thank you to Russell Colbert for providing 1.21 gigawatts. Thank you to Darren Osadic for providing the tunes. I'm Darren Schaefer, and thank you for listening to the Cooper Vortex.
About a man many years ago, hijacked a plane, so we were told. Then he jumped into the cold. A glass of bourbon and a cigarette. He's in the air, the stage is set. Polite and kind, the people say it's time to make his getaway. This is how the story goes about the money and the man. Cooper, they call me now. Catch me if you can. Rolled up in his coat-built tie. He's got enough to change his life. Where he landed, no one knows. But from his tale, a legend grows. Was a cold, dark, rainy night. As he walked, he saw light. Held his cash close to his side. Just needs to catch a ride. This is how the story goes about the money and the man. DB Cooper, they call me now. Catch me if you can. to the bone. Look for a place to use the phone. Little cafe outside of town. He walked in, he just sat down. Met a man with a cowboy hat. He told a friend right where he's at. Into the night he disappeared. And from that night a legend reared. This is how the story goes about the money and the man. D.B. Cooper, they call me now. Catch me if you can. 40 years, the secret's out. The story has been told. D.B. Cooper's done running now. He was 80